September 1944. The Allied forces pushing through France had just achieved something military strategists hadn't dared to hope for: a complete rupture of German defensive lines. General George Patton's Third Army was tearing eastward at a pace that defied every pre-war calculation. 30 miles a day, 40, sometimes more. But nobody had planned for what came next. The faster the army advanced, the more it consumed, and the farther it moved from everything keeping it alive. A single Sherman tank devoured 5 gallons of fuel for every mile it traveled. One infantry division required 650 tons of daily supplies, ammunition, food, medicine, spare parts, all of it. The port of Cherbourg, still half demolished from German sabotage, couldn't handle anything close to what was needed. Antwerp, the next viable harbor, was months away from being operational. That meant everything. Every rifle round, every medical kit, every box of rations had to travel overland from the Normandy beaches, 350 miles through roads the retreating Germans had deliberately destroyed. Back at Supreme Headquarters, the numbers weren't adding up. Patton's tanks were running dry. Some armored battalions had gone completely still, not because of enemy resistance, but because their fuel gauges were sitting on empty. Forward units reported just 3 days of ammunition remaining. 1 week into the crisis, the situation had already reached a breaking point. On August 21st, Colonel Frank Ross, the Chief of Transportation, delivered the grim assessment to General Eisenhower. Nearly a quarter of all supplies, 23%, were being lost before reaching the front. Truck accidents on broken roads, German air attacks catching convoys in the open, vehicles breaking down mid-route with no support. The system was hemorrhaging resources the Allies couldn't afford to lose. Eisenhower studied the map. The opportunity to end the war before winter was evaporating by the day. The Wehrmacht was falling back now, but give them time to dig in behind the Siegfried Line, and every week of delay would cost thousands of lives. "I need answers in days," Eisenhower told the room, "not weeks." The meeting ended with no solutions on the table. 90 miles from that headquarters tent, Technical Sergeant Daniel Kowalski was standing beside a road in northern France, staring at the charred wreckage of yet another convoy. 7 trucks, overturned and gutted, supplies scattered across a quarter-mile of roadside. A German strafing run had caught them grouped tightly on a narrow stretch of road, and the result was exactly what you'd expect when 20 vehicles are lined up in plain sight. Kowalski was 36 years old. Before the draft notice arrived in 1943, he'd spent 16 years hauling steel loads across Ohio and western Pennsylvania, mountain passes in ice, flooded valleys in blown-out bridges in spring thaw. The Army put him through 3 weeks of driving training and shipped him overseas. Now he was watching experienced men die, and he's pretty sure he understood why. Nobody in command had ever actually driven a truck. He lit a cigarette and thought about something his old freight dispatcher used to say back in Columbus. "The convoys for the paperwork, the money is in the spacing." The official doctrine governing the Red Ball Express, the emergency supply operation now running night and day, was straightforward. Trucks operated in groups of 20 or more vehicles, 60 yards apart, maximum 25 miles per hour. Safety in numbers, that was the theory. But Kowalski had run 7 convoys in 2 weeks. Every single one had taken losses.
The problem wasn't only the Luftwaffe attacks, though those were devastating enough. The deeper problem was what made those attacks so easy. 20 trucks rolling together on a rural French road created a visible column stretching almost a quarter mile. German reconnaissance pilots could spot it from 10 miles out. When a convoy's lead truck finally saw enemy aircraft and stopped, everything behind it stopped too. Nobody could scatter, nobody could maneuver. The spacing that was supposed to provide protection became a perfectly organized kill zone. But Kowalski began to notice something else. On August 23rd, his convoy was held at a loading depot for 6 hours while the full formation was assembled. A handful of drivers, fed up with waiting once their own cargo was secured, simply left on their own. No formation, no schedule, no escort. Just individual trucks rolling out whenever they were ready. Every one of those drivers made it to the forward supply dump without incident. The convoy that eventually departed lost 3 trucks to a Focke-Wulf A-19 attack before it was halfway there. Kowalski began to track the pattern in a small notebook. Independent trucks, traveling alone or in pairs across a spread of several hours, were virtually impossible for German aircraft to target effectively. A single truck wasn't worth the fuel, the sortie, or the ammunition to intercept, but a convoy of 20 vehicles, that was a prize worth diving on. The math was ruthless in its simplicity. A convoy of 20 trucks was one target. 20 trucks spread across 4 hours of road were 20 separate hunting missions, and the Luftwaffe simply didn't have the resources, the fuel, or the pilot hours to pursue all of them. His notebook filled up. Convoys averaged 23% losses. The small sample of independent trucks he'd tracked, under 3%. On August 25th, he took the notebook to his company commander, Captain Gerald Owens. "Sir, I think I've found a way to cut our supply losses by 90%. Captain Owens looked at the truck driver standing in his tent, dirty coveralls, hands permanently stained with grease, and said something that would be repeated in military logistics classrooms for the next 80 decades. "Kowalski, you're a truck driver. The tactics are handled by people who went to officers' school." The formal rejection came in writing. Owens forwarded the proposal up the chain with a handwritten note. "Enlisted man proposes abandoning established convoy doctrine. Recommend dismissal." The response from battalion headquarters arrived quickly. Convoy operations are grounded in proven military doctrine. Independent vehicle movement creates communication failures, eliminates mutual support, and violates tactical protocol. Proposal denied. Kowalski read it and laughed, a short, humorless sound. He'd been driving trucks since half these staff officers were in school, and they were explaining vehicle operations to him. But he didn't stop. On August 27th, he sought out Lieutenant Colonel Martin Greer, the Deputy Operations Officer for the Transportation Corps. Greer actually listened for nearly 15 minutes before shaking his head. "Danny, your logic isn't wrong, but what happens when a truck breaks down alone? No escort, no support. The driver's stranded on a road that still has bypassed German units on it." Greer tapped the map. Convoy security isn't just about air attacks. These roads aren't clear. "Sir, with respect, we're currently losing a quarter of what we send out using convoys that are supposed to be safe. I'll take those odds." "It's not just your odds, it's Army property, strategic material." Greer's voice softened. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, I really do, but this isn't a trucking company. There are reasons we operate the way we operate."
On August 28th, Kowalski tried presenting his data at a driver's briefing. The room didn't receive it well. "So your plan is to send us out alone to die one at a time instead of together?" one sergeant called out. "At least in a convoy, we've got backup," another added. Even the drivers thought he'd lost it. Word spread through the motor pools. Kowalski wanted to play cowboy on French roads while German fighters were actively hunting. His own squad stopped sitting with him at meals. But 3 people were paying attention. Private First Class Marcus Webb, a driver from Detroit's auto plants, found Kowalski privately that evening. "I've been watching the same thing you have. The solo runs are cleaner. Everyone who drives knows it. They just won't say it out loud." 2 other drivers, Corporal Eddie Salinas and Private Leon Harris, told Kowalski they'd volunteer for his method if it ever got approved. It didn't look like it would. On August 29th, Colonel Ross personally reviewed the proposal and wrote across the top in red, "Denied. Any driver operating outside established convoy parameters will face court-martial." Raymond Kowalski's idea was officially dead. Except someone else had been reading the reports. Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, wasn't sleeping much in late August 1944. The supply situation had crossed from critical to catastrophic. Patton had been forced to halt not by the Wehrmacht, but by empty fuel tanks. British units were rationing ammunition. The window to exploit the German collapse before winter was closing fast. Smith had a habit of reading everything: after-action reports from truck companies, casualty statistics from Red Ball Express operations, and, buried in a stack of rejected proposals, a memo from some sergeant in Ohio that everyone in the chain of command had dismissed as reckless. On August 30th, Smith walked into Colonel Ross's office without knocking. This driver, Kowalski, his proposal about staggered individual dispatch, why did we reject it? Ross was caught off guard. "Sir, it violates fundamental convoy doctrine. The vehicles would be—" "I've read the doctrine. What I'm asking is why we're losing 23% of our supplies following it. The casualty rates are within acceptable parameters for—" "Acceptable parameters." Smith's voice had the temperature of sheet steel. "General Patton's army is sitting still because we're accepting acceptable parameters. Bring me this sergeant." 2 hours later, Danny Kowalski was standing in a headquarters tent, still wearing diesel-stained coveralls, facing 3 full colonels and a lieutenant general. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. He was fairly certain his military career was about to end in handcuffs. Smith didn't waste time on introductions. "Sergeant, explain your method. Assume I know nothing about trucks." Kowalski took one breath. "Sir, the Germans can't intercept what they can't predict. Right now, we send convoys of 20 vehicles at scheduled intervals on standard routes at fixed speeds. Luftwaffe reconnaissance learns our pattern in a week. They just position fighters along the route and wait for us to arrive." He opened his notebook. "But if we load trucks as they arrive at the depot, no waiting for the full formation, and dispatch each vehicle the moment it's ready, we break the pattern completely. Instead of 20 trucks compressed into a quarter-mile column, we have 20 trucks spread across 80 miles of road over 3 or 4 hours. The enemy never knows when the next one is coming or from which direction." "Breakdowns?" Colonel Ross interrupted. "Enemy ground contact?"
Same escort jeep patrols on the main routes, but one broken-down truck no longer stops 19 others, and a bypassed German unit that ambushes one vehicle isn't ambushing 20. The room went quiet. Smith looked at the numbers in the notebook. Convoys, 23% losses. Independent trucks, 3%. The sample is too small, Colonel Ross said. That's anecdotal. Then test it. Smith's decision was instantaneous. Sergeant, you have 1 week to prove that everything the Army had been doing is wrong. If it fails, men will die and you'll spend the rest of the war in a stockade somewhere. If it works, it might save thousands of lives across the entire European theater. September 1st, 1944. Kowalski stood at the Bayou Forward Staging Depot and watched the first of 20 trucks roll in for loading. This was it. 1 week to prove that everything the Army had been doing was wrong. If it failed, men would die and he'd spend the rest of the war in a stockade somewhere. If it worked, it might save thousands of lives across the entire European theater. The standard convoy method would have looked like this. All 20 trucks wait until every vehicle is fully loaded, 4 to 6 hours on average, then depart together in a 60-yard formation at 25 miles per hour. Estimated travel time to forward supply dumps, 14 hours. Total time from depot arrival to delivery, around 20 hours. Kowalski's version was completely different. The first truck finished loading at 0600. He didn't let it wait. You're gone. Route 7. Drive safe. Independent operation. The driver looked uncertain, but nodded and pulled out. The second truck was ready at 0619. Go. The third at 0634. Go. Over 5 hours, between 0600 and 1100, Kowalski dispatched all 20 trucks in staggered sequence. At any given moment, they were spread across 80 miles of road, each traveling at whatever conditions actually allowed, rather than a mandated formation speed. He also scrapped the fixed 25-mile-per-hour ceiling. You know these roads now, he told his drivers. If the conditions allow 40, run 40. If it's rough, run 30. Use your judgment. The Transportation Corps observers watching the operation were visibly alarmed. One colonel's aide kept a running log of violations, exceeding posted speed limits, failure to maintain convoy organization, independent vehicle operation in a combat zone. Then the trucks started arriving. The first vehicle reached the 3rd Army forward dump at 1830 hours, 12 and a half hours from departure, an hour and a half faster than convoy average. The last truck rolled in before dawn the following morning.
20 trucks delivered their cargo. 0 losses, 0 attacks, 1 minor mechanical issue, a blown tire that the driver changed himself and continued without delaying anyone else by a single minute. The Luftwaffe had spotted 3 of Kowalski's trucks during the run. Intercepting a lone truck meant diverting a fighter from patrol, burning fuel to chase a single target, and expending ammunition for minimal strategic gain. 2 pilots didn't even try. The third made 1 strafing pass, missed, and turned back to base rather than waste remaining fuel on pursuit. Day 2, 22 trucks, 22 deliveries, 0 losses. Day 3, 22 trucks, 22 deliveries, 0 losses. By day 5, even the colonels who had written the proposal off as dangerous nonsense were staring at the numbers in disbelief. Kowalski's insane method was cutting supply losses from 23% to under 3%,
a 90% reduction, and trucks were reaching the front lines faster than anyone had thought possible. On September 7th, General Smith issued the directive. All Red Ball Express operations would immediately transition to staggered individual dispatch protocols, as developed by Technical Sergeant Daniel Kowalski. The shift happened almost overnight. By mid-September, the full Red Ball Express network, nearly 6,000 trucks, had abandoned traditional convoy formations entirely. Depots operated around the clock, loading and dispatching vehicles continuously. Trucks rolled out every 3 to 5 minutes rather than massing into large, predictable formations. The numbers that followed were extraordinary. In the final 8 weeks of Red Ball Express operations, September through November 1944, supply losses fell to 2.7%. Delivery speed increased by 32%. The total volume of supplies reaching Patton's Third Army and other frontline units more than doubled. German after-action reports captured the frustration clearly. A Luftwaffe wing commander wrote in October, "Allied supply trucks now operate without detectable patterns. Single vehicle interdiction represents inefficient use of our limited air resources. Recommend redirecting fighter operations to direct ground support rather than logistics harassment. The Americans have made truck hunting economically indefensible." And that was precisely the point. For every German fighter diverted to chase scattered individual trucks, one less aircraft was defending against Allied bomber formations or supporting Wehrmacht infantry. The trade-off had become impossible to justify. The full impact was staggering. The Red Ball Express, now running Kowalski's staggered dispatch protocols, delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies in 82 days of operation. Enough ammunition, fuel, and equipment to sustain 6 Allied armies advancing from France to the German border. Patton's Third Army alone received enough fuel to drive from Normandy to the Rhine. Later, in October, a captured German staff officer being interrogated near Aachen was asked about Allied supply operations. He shook his head slowly. "We cannot target what we cannot predict," he said through a translator. "Your supply trucks are like shadows now, everywhere and nowhere at once. We gave up trying to intercept them. It is a waste of fuel we cannot replace." That quote made its way through intelligence summaries and eventually landed on Eisenhower's desk. The Supreme Commander circled it and wrote a note to Smith. "This sergeant's method has forced the Germans to concede the logistics war entirely. Recommend formal recognition." On November 18, 1944, 2 days after the Red Ball Express officially ceased operations, Technical Sergeant Daniel Kowalski received the Bronze Star Medal for exceptional meritorious service in support of combat operations. The citation named his innovative logistics method specifically, crediting it with substantially reducing supply losses and improving Allied operational effectiveness across the European theater. Kowalski returned to Columbus in 1946. He went back to freight hauling, the same job, the same roads, the early mornings. No memoir, no speaking engagements, just a bronze star in a box somewhere in the back of a closet, and the memory of a few weeks in France when the most practical man in the room turned out to be the one everyone had dismissed. But the military remembered. In 1947, the U.S. Army Transportation Corps formally adopted staggered dispatch protocols as official operational doctrine. The method became required curriculum at Fort Lee, Virginia, the Army's primary logistics training institution, where every officer learned the story of the freight driver from Ohio who had rewritten convoy theory in a beat-up notebook while watching the old system burn. The method carried forward through Korea, the Berlin airlift, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Army logistics operations in every conflict since World War II have used variations of what Kowalski worked out on a roadside in France. Modern military convoys no longer mass into large, predictable formations. They operate with dispersed timing, varied routes, and patterns deliberately designed to be unpredictable. The technology evolved: GPS tracking, encrypted satellite coordination, real-time vehicle monitoring, but the underlying principle that Kowalski identified remained unchanged. Enemy interdiction efforts become economically impossible when you disperse your logistics footprint so widely that targeting it becomes more costly than ignoring it. Civilian logistics absorbed the same lesson. The modern freight industry's just-in-time delivery networks, continuous dispatch scheduling, and distributed fulfillment systems all trace their intellectual origins to the same core insight. Bunching creates vulnerability. Spreading creates resilience. Companies moving hundreds of thousands of packages daily dispatch vehicles in continuous waves rather than scheduled batches. It's faster, harder to disrupt, and scales better at every level. They almost certainly don't know they're running a method that was figured out by a truck driver during the Second World War, but they are. In 2003, the U.S. Army Transportation Museum at Fort Lee opened a permanent exhibit dedicated to the Red Ball Express. One section is devoted entirely to Daniel Kowalski. His original notebook, the one where he calculated convoy loss rates in pencil and worked out the math that nobody in command wanted to hear, sits behind glass in a display case. Beside it is a photograph, a man in dirty coveralls leaning against the hood of a GMC truck, a cigarette in hand, looking exactly like what he was, a working-class driver who understood his profession more deeply than anyone with a rank or a title. The exhibit's placard reads, "The most important innovations sometimes come not from the people with authority, but from the people closest to the work." Kowalski passed away in 1985 at the age of 75. His obituary in the Columbus Dispatch mentioned his service in the war and mentioned the Bronze Star without explaining what he'd done to earn it. Just a retired driver, a veteran, a quiet man who'd done his part and come home. But in every military logistics course taught today, in every doctoral analysis of how the Allies sustained their advance across occupied Europe, in every case study of wartime supply chain innovation, there is a reference to the sergeant who demonstrated that the most important thing in any organization isn't a bad idea. It's the assumption that the people at the top understand the work better than the people actually doing it. His method didn't just cut supply losses by 90%. It changed how the modern world moves everything from military hardware to online shopping orders sitting on your doorstep, still running, still working, still making the enemy's job impossible. All because one freight driver from Columbus refused to believe that the way things had always been done was the only way they could be done.